Welcome to Victim's View, a show produced by the Solicitor General's Office. I'm Carmen Smith, the Solicitor General. The Solicitor General's Office prosecutes a lot of domestic or family violence cases in Fulton County. Those cases can involve everything from verbal abuse to physical injury. Today we're talking with the Director of Victim Services for the Solicitor General's Office, Amanda Planchard, and the Executive Director of the Georgia Commission on Family Violence, Greg Loughlin. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Now, Amanda, I know we work together every day, so I know what you do. Would you share with the viewers, what does the Victim Assistance Unit of the Solicitor's Office actually do, just in general?
Sure. So the Solicitor's Office, prosecuting misdemeanor crimes, has victims who need services. So the Victim Assistance Program provides emotional support and legal advocacy to victims of misdemeanor crimes that occur in Fulton County.
And what do you do with that office?
So primarily it's providing emotional support, referrals to community agencies, safety planning. It's also accompanying victims to court and explaining the criminal justice process and what's going to happen.
And in your work, I imagine that a lot of people don't understand we deal with a lot of police reports, a lot of reports from victims, and your communication with victims. Now, we're talking today about strangulation. What would you say, with regard to strangulation, what would you say would be a general example or a definition of that?
Well, strangulation occurs anytime that you're blocking the blood flow or the airflow with external pressure to the neck or throat. So it's different than choking, although sometimes people will refer to it as choking. It can be done with the hands, either around the neck with both hands, or a headlock using this part of the arm from behind, or also placing your knees on the person's chest. So that's manual strangulation. Also, ligature strangulation would be the use of some cord-like object, such as a shoelace or an electrical cord, etc. So those are the two most common that we see, and manual strangulation is by far the most common.
And in our work with misdemeanors, sometimes with the simple batteries or even the assaults, there's no physical or visible injury that you could have. Is the case in strangulation?
Yes, only about 50% of cases, according to studies and according to our own research in the office, have any kind of visible injury. However, we run the risk that there may be internal injuries to the neck or throat that are being overlooked.
And what do you mean by overlooked?
Well, there's a concern that victims may not seek medical attention as often as they would for other kinds of injuries. And so there's a concern that a victim may need additional medical treatment that they're not getting, and that we're not also finding some of the symptoms and results of the strangulation because they're not getting that medical attention.
Also, I think in our work, we see that it's usually not just one thing, it's a number of things that happen during an incident. Could you give an example of a situation where it's not just strangulation, but some other things that might happen, and in that regard determine whether or not we as a solicitor's office will proceed as a misdemeanor as opposed to sending it to the DA's office to prosecute as a felony?
Well, many times strangulation occurs in the context of other kinds of physical violence that may be occurring, like slapping, hitting, kicking, etc. And so sometimes we'll see cases where they have visible injuries from those things, from punches, etc., and not from the actual strangulation. But what we're finding is that the criminal justice system has historically minimized how serious strangulation is as well. And so because of a lack of physical injuries that are seen in these cases, most of the time it has historically been charged as a simple battery, which is a misdemeanor crime, and not a more serious crime as it could be. And so that's one of the goals in looking at this research.
I think also one of the lines that we have to actually determine which side we're on is when there's an attempted rape of the victim. And in that attempted rape, it could be charged as a sexual battery depending on what parts of the body they touch, or it could be an attempted rape situation. And sometimes that's hard for a victim, isn't it, to try to describe exactly what happened during these incidents.
That's correct. It's hard to articulate traumatic facts that are distressing to kind of talk about. But it's also hard for a victim of a crime to understand some of the legal nuances of what must be proved. They just know that they felt like they were going to die, for example, in the case of a strangulation, or in the case of a attempted rape or something like that. It feels the same whether it's completed or not.
I know in the many police reports that I've read, they often just use the word choking. So again, there has to be more education to distinguish between those terms, correct?
That's correct. Choking, in effect, is really when you get something lodged inside of your throat that prevents you from being able to breathe. And so strangulation is external pressure, and choking is something internal that's blocking your breathing. We use these terms like choking, I think sometimes to mimic the term that crime victims will use, and so we use the language that they used. But it is important that we start educating professionals about how serious strangulation is, and we start calling it what it is.
And I assume that also extends to prosecutors.
Yes, ma'am.
Prosecutors are probably just as guilty as everybody else, I would imagine.
I think they need training just like everyone else, and this has been an eye-opener for even me, who thought I knew a whole lot about this area, but have come to learn lots more, and it affects the questions that I ask victims when I am trying to assess the situation that they're in. And so I'm able to ask better questions now, and that would be my hope. Such as some of the signs and symptoms that victims will frequently experience with strangulation. Even if there aren't any visible injuries, they may be experiencing sore throat, pain in swallowing, changes in their voice or breathing patterns. They may need medical attention. You can even have fractures in those parts of your neck, etc., like the larynx, etc. So we really need to offer up better training for victims, for professionals in the medical community and in the law enforcement and legal communities.
Now that you've said that, it makes me think about what you said before about not seeking medical treatment, especially at the scene. And there have been tons of reports that we'll get that will say they refuse treatment. I don't know if there's anything we can ever do about that, or other than try to educate potential victims.
I think if you educate law enforcement, then they can educate victims and really push for the medical attention and the need for it and why. A lot of people assume that once they're able to breathe again, that there's no more danger. And in fact, we have found from studies that people can die even as a result of injuries that they sustained even hours after the assault occurred. And so it's important that medical professionals be alerted, even if just to have EMTs come out to the scene and check and make sure someone's okay, particularly if they're pregnant. And that is a scenario that we see a lot, because it also provides danger to the baby. And it's not unheard of for victims to suffer a miscarriage as a result of the strangulation that occurred.
And all of that, I would assume we would have to kind of rely on you guys as far as the victim advocates to have the victim share more with you about what is going on or what happened during the incident and whether there were previous incidents.
That's correct. The more questions we ask, the more information that we can get, and what we find is that strangulation is part of a larger pattern of escalating violence. And that it is a sign of increased danger, and so it gives us a lot of information that can allow us to more effectively hold abusers accountable and to try and provide safety and security for victims as much as possible.
So when you interview victims, do you talk about previous incidents, previous history?
We do, particularly when there are allegations of strangulation. We want to know whether a strangulation has occurred in the past. And now I think people are getting better about asking about it in general, because it is one of the top 5 lethality factors in domestic violence cases. And so knowing that means that we need to be asking that question, not just about what happened in this particular incident that the police might have been involved in, but what happened previously in the relationship that may or may not have been reported to the police.
And when you see the police reports, I think that it's incumbent upon us as prosecutors to further investigate those matters as well. Not only with your talks with the victim, but also investigate those matters as well with the police to kind of, add to that police report. See if we can get a supplemental, and in any domestic scene as though treated as like it's a murder scene, as far as what they see and what they don't see. Because I assume some of these strangulations happen on the floor, in the bed, wherever.
Right, and evidence collection can go a long way to successfully prosecuting these offenders. So I think it is kind of twofold, where you're investigating the scene and looking for signs of a struggle, but you're also investigating with the actual victim and asking about words that the abuser may have said during the strangulation, or feelings that the victim may have had that all might be used to corroborate the allegations in court down the road.
Awesome. I think that you have your work cut out for you, and so for you as well as prosecutors in these incidents. We're going to take a quick break, but stay tuned, because when we come back, we're going to learn more about strangulation and victim safety. Welcome back to Victim's View. I'm talking to Amanda Planchard and Greg Loughlin, Executive Director of the Georgia Commission on Family Violence. Mr. Loughlin, let me ask you some questions about the Georgia Commission. Could you just generally explain to us, what do you guys do?
I'm laughing, Carmen, because you were a distinguished commission member for about 10 years and really did an outstanding job as a member of the Georgia Commission on Family Violence. We're a state agency that has 37 members that are appointed from all three branches of government. And our primary functions are around advising the legislature as well as the governor's office and the judiciary around policy issues related to family violence. We also are charged with developing a state plan to end family violence and coordinating task forces in local jurisdictions throughout the state. And before we go further, I just want to thank you and Amanda for the work that you do. I feel like the work that our solicitors and victim witness directors do is really homicide prevention. And thank you both.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Let's focus on strangulation.
Yes,
I understand the Commission is going to be looking at that a little bit more closely this year.
We certainly are. And like Amanda, it was a sensitization process for me too around the need to really dig in and get focused on non-fatal domestic violence related strangulation. I think one of the things when Amanda talked about risk factors, I think a lot of us in the field had seen choking, strangulation around slapping, hitting. But I think when we really look at the research and when we really talk to survivors, strangulation needs to be up around firearms and around the kind of lethality of when you point a firearm at somebody, that's highly dangerous. And when you take somebody's life in your hands and believe that you have the right to control somebody's breathing and blood flow to their brain, that needs to be taken just as seriously.
And taking it seriously, again, the distinction between strangulation and choking?
Well, again, I think Amanda did a good job. We choke when we get a carrot caught in our throat. And I would never correct. I mean, most people out in the community and survivors talk about choking, and I would never correct a survivor, but I think I might redirect our conversation towards strangulation. When we talk about strangulation, I think we're both talking about immediate damage that can lead to death, but we're also talking about brain damage. There's so much in the news these days about professional athletes and brain damage that they're experiencing. With strangulation, you can give somebody irreversible brain damage after 10 seconds.
10 seconds?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Of holding the jugular veins closed. And so it can happen very, very quickly. And so I think that's something that a lot of us in the community have not really been aware of what we're talking about here. And that's both immediate risk, but also brain damage.
And how would people learn more about this?
Well, I think I'm really glad you're having a show like this. I think the commission is going out to as many task forces around the state as will listen, and we've got about 18 task forces presentations lined up now. I think educating, our systems, both our community-based advocates and then those of us who work within the criminal justice system, just about how serious this is. As I've studied this issue more, and I think as the commission has, we're seeing strangulation when a man raises his hands to a woman's neck to strangle her, and 99% of these cases are men who strangle women. That person is raising their hand as a potential killer. And so we need to respond to that. Now, let me add a caveat to that too, Carmen, in terms of folks strangle, or men strangle not necessarily to kill. They also do it to send the message, and actually more often do it to send the message that I can kill you at any time. Because once the survivor knows that I can kill you, or somebody, this man can kill them, just with the grip of his hands, that victim or survivor will live in terror and will live under that person's power and control. And so we're finding a lot of times strangulation is not used as the lethal, it's not used to kill, it's used to send the message that I can kill. And then in Georgia, often the person circles back with a firearm to actually commit the homicide.
I'm glad you made that distinction, because I think that most people would use the word choking instead of strangulation, and they think of strangulation resulting in death.
Yes.
But as you just clarified for us, that's not always the case. And certainly when we're talking about a dynamic of a domestic violence situation, there could be several other factors involved, and Amanda's very good about going over those. But you're a statewide organization, so you have your work cut out for you, going around the state of Georgia, trying to educate people on this topic. I know that you're not a lawyer, but as far as how it's treated in other states, do you have any idea of how other states treat strangulation as a crime?
Absolutely. 37 other states have upgraded their statutes to articulate strangulation as a felony. And that's based on the research, and then also based on what we know about the lethality of strangulation. So states that have done that, Alabama, Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina hasn't yet. We may beat them to it. Texas, and so these are states that are recognizing what we're recognizing now and have already upgraded their statutes.
Now, just to be clear, we're not talking about that strangulation isn't a crime. It is a crime.
Yes.
It could be aggravated battery or something along those lines as a felony. We're talking about as a separate crime in and of itself, correct?
Actually not, Carmen. I mean, you're right. Strangulation is already a crime. It can be charged under aggravated assault. It can be charged under simple battery, although again, we're trying to highlight the need that it needs to be under aggravated assault. So the hands can be counted as a deadly weapon, and it can be charged under our current aggravated assault statute. The problem is that, like Amanda said, in 50% of these cases, there's not physical injury that the officer sees, and yet the lethality rates escalate tremendously after a strangulation. A victim who's been strangled is 7 times more likely to be killed by that same partner down the road. And so given the lack of physical kind of evidence in some of these cases, we feel like it's not being charged or found as serious as it really is. And so we're talking about under aggravated assault, spelling out some of the elements of strangulation that Amanda talked about, cutting off the blood flow, cutting off the airflow, suffocation. And so we're basically articulating what's already a crime, because you have to name something in order to do something about it. And we want to name this terrible crime.
So adding to the law more to clarify.
Yes, ma'am.
And focus on the seriousness of it.
Yes. And as an educational piece, we're seeing this as, like you said, what are we going to do to educate the community? Well, we're both training, and we feel like this is such an important issue, such a a deadly issue that the Commission, partnering with the Solicitor Generals, partnering with the district attorneys, partnering with the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, want to articulate this under aggravated assault and name it so we can address it.
And in your work on the commission, I would assume that you have so many topics that we need to focus on, and this is one of many. With going out with that outreach, would you encourage people to reach out to you to come to their communities if they needed someone to come and speak on this topic or anything?
We'd be happy to. They can contact us at the Georgia Commission on Family Violence. There's also a national training institute. It's the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention, and they are founded specifically to help communities and systems up our game around this lethal topic. And so they have a tremendous number of resources for law enforcement officers, for prosecutors, for so many of the other systems to help. And so I would encourage folks that want more information to go to that website or call our office.
And your office number is?
You can call me directly, 404-463-6230.
And again, the focus on strangulation is so important that any kind of outreach that we all do is I think, a benefit for all the citizens of Georgia. We look forward to everybody working more, directly on this topic, and I appreciate both of you coming in. And I wanted to thank Amanda Planchard and Greg Loughlin. I'll be back with some final thoughts about strangulation. We've learned a lot today about the difference between choking and strangulation and the impact it has on victims. Strangulation can result in severe injuries to the victim. It is an indicator of escalating violence. Thanks to Amanda Planchard and Greg Loughlin, we've learned the difference between choking and strangulation, and we appreciate their efforts to educate the public on this issue. Thank you for watching Victims View. We'll see you next time.